Welcome back to S&C Coaches React, and today we're reacting to a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, Fabricio Andrey. He is the 2021 GI World Champion at the featherweight, and we've got a couple of different things on his Instagram, a couple of different training sessions in the gym, or a couple of different clips of training sessions in the gym that we want to talk through. Fabricio, is a very powerful jiu-jitsu. He's very fast. He puts a lot of pressure on his opponents. He moves through positions fast. He's very strong in those positions. And we were kind of interested to see, does he have much training stuff up on his Instagram? And we've seen a couple of things that we've seen a couple of different things on his Instagram that I think were worthwhile talking about, and it's basically all good. I think it's all good. It's all great. It's all great to see. So first of all, I'm starting off with some rear delt stuff. I think that is no amount of upper back, mid back, rear delt, shoulder stability stuff is too much in jiu-jitsu.
I think particularly in jiu-jitsu, people get a lot of tweaks and a lot of pains, and your shoulders in particular get reefed on quite a lot. By both yourself trying to put them in weird positions and by other people putting them into bad positions. So you'll tap and doing the basic stuff like this, like whether this is where in the spectrum of actual strength training all the way through to it being prehab or rehab, where it falls in that spectrum we don't quite know. But for most people, if they're training full-time as a jiu-jitsu athlete or something like that, it's very, very likely you're going to have some sort of kind of TheraBand movement or just light voluminous movement for the shoulders just to keep you tipping away.
You do see resistance bands kind of come into their own for shoulder specifics work, especially for rehab or prehab work. Resistance bands work very well for this style of movement, especially for rear delt stuff. Obviously every physio in the world says you have rotator cuff issues, but in some circumstances someone must have them.
Yeah.
And so training them is never a bad idea, especially for jiu-jitsu.
I think the other thing as well is, like, jiu-jitsu and grappling sports in general, and most combat sports, people will be very internally rotated, and doing some band work on a daily basis will help to just keep you open and in a kind of neutral position, and obviously that has massive benefits posturally for the rest of your back.
Next up we got, again, more upper back stuff, some great technically weighted pull-ups, so just phenomenal work. There's an unbelievably great exercise for jiu-jitsu. If you can do these technically very well, if you do them really clean without a lot of kipping and maintain really good positions, weighted pull-ups are so useful.
I like these as well. They're not quite wide grip, but they're probably wider than standard pull-up grip.
It's very good form. There's no flaring out of the elbows and pulling himself in. Like, he's really pulling himself close to the bar, using his lats as much as possible. Nice wrist position here, and I don't know what weight he's using, but it's they're
heavy enough.
Yeah, any kind of weighted additional for him, as someone who's quite light as it is very beneficial to do with that kind of form.
If you're looking at this and kind of trying to figure out, should I be doing the weighted pull-ups in my training, I think for a lot of people, if you're getting to the point where you're doing somewhere between 5 and 8 sets of 10 reps, very, very strict, especially 10 reps with a pause on some of the reps, you are getting to the point now where you're going to get more out of doing a weighted pull-up variation. Now, if you're in the case where you can barely get 5x5 on pull-ups done and they mightn't be very strict, you probably don't need to go into the weighted pull-ups kind of variations right now, and it's something you should be working towards in the future.
If pull-ups are something that you can do to impress people, then it's probably time to weight your pull-ups. Is a good way to look at it. So next up we got some medicine ball slams. So any kind of power training, speed strength stuff is phenomenal for jiu-jitsu, of course, because as we mentioned, his style of jiu-jitsu is very, very aggressive, and you see him moving through positions. It's very fast jiu-jitsu, so any amount of power stuff is just going to benefit him, and if he's doing this appropriately, so if he's maintaining speed as his main metric of performance on his power training, then we're doing well. Medicine ball slams with an appropriate amount of weight, so it's probably like 5 kilos or a little bit more, and moving as fast as possible for a limited number of reps. Plenty of rest between sets, so you've got time to restore and dissipate some of that fatigue, and then you can come back in and do them as fast as possible again. Medicine ball slams are a favorite among a lot of trainers. It wouldn't be hugely up there for our kind of power trainer, speed spraying stuff, but it's by no means a bad exercise.
No, we probably have to address the elephant in the room at this point as well. They are incredibly flashy shorts.
No, but he can get away with them.
Yeah, he absolutely can.
He also paints his fingernails.
Very interesting.
You can get away with it though.
I think for like the use of a medicine ball over a barbell or something like this as well is probably a bit more applicable for the combat athlete, because he's like, even the lifting of the medicine ball overhead, like he has a lot of that kind of stuff going on where he's not necessarily braced as he's lifting someone off the ground, or as he's pulling away from a grip or posturing up. Like it's a bit more applicable, and he's probably just a bit more in his wheelhouse than, say, a very strict RDL or something would be.
So next up we've got, so it's part of his conditioning circuit, which is, or his power circuit, which is not something we really like to see, and we've talked about this a lot, you know, in the 7 deadly sins of S&C for combat sports. But in this scenario, he's not really negatively affecting his sport-specific skill. In this scenario, he's just kind of negatively affecting his power training, because he's going to be fatigued when he comes back around to his medicine ball slams. Now, if we look at this in isolation, practicing, you know, passing someone's guard, it's interesting in jiu-jitsu is that we see a lot of people will drill really slowly, and they'll talk about rolling really slowly because they're rolling multiple times a day and they're not really going hard out. Then you'll see other people, you go to other jiu-jitsu schools, or other people teaching jiu-jitsu will drill very, very hard, and will drill as fast as possible. If we were to look at this from principles of learning skills, you would start off learning something very slow, and then you would work up in intensity and speed over time. So ultimately, I think it makes more sense to drill as hard as you can safely with your opponent, you know. And so when you see stuff like this, I think, to be honest, I like it. I think it is beneficial for someone's jiu-jitsu. One of the killers, I think, for most people watching this, so obviously unless you're pro or semi-pro, most amateur jiu-jitsu people aren't in good shape, you know. So I think this is something that I think is useful.
Yeah, like the foot movement here is very good, you know, that thing of landing the non-standing leg before the currently standing leg moves. You know, like that's one of their principles, that like you always want one foot on the ground. If you saw a soccer player doing movement like this, their feet would be kind of sweeping and both feet would be almost off the ground at the same time, and one would be landing. Whereas here you see that the foot that moves in lands before the next foot moves off, and you'll barely see it because it's so fast, but it's quite technically sharp here, just a small little piece of nuance. In general, we don't like power training to be done in circuits. Like, we just don't. It's not the best way to do it. But yeah, there's some nice movement here for sure. I
do like the highly demanding kind of drills separate from your rolling. So I like that you take them out of the rolling context. So you're not really fatigued for your drilling, you're rolling, and you're doing the things that are high intensity. For him, are low skill. So this would be very, very low for him. For someone new to jiu-jitsu, obviously this would be quite a highly demanding skill. It would be brand new to that person. But for him, it's not something that's massively demanding. So he can practice this with as much intensity as he possibly can, and I think get a lot of benefit from it. Okay, so next up we have got some clean grip high pulls. In general, what you do see is that clean grip high pulls do seem to just irritate people's shoulders. So this is not a problem with the exercise, probably more a problem with the person doing them. So people will lack that internal rotation. People will just have, you know, weaker muscles involved with this and will inflame their shoulders, probably going too heavy, maybe doing the inappropriate technique. But in isolation, so just doing this exercise with healthy shoulders and with the appropriate strength, again, it kind of makes sense. It's a lot of that upper back, rear delt movements, the traps, you know, the pulling upwards, pulling away from someone is certainly beneficial.
I think as well you have to look at these as like, these are really good muscle building and strength building exercise right now. They're not really good in terms of like the power development exercise like we commonly see with a clean, you know. And that's where I think people can get a small bit mixed up of like, they'll see people doing, which this essentially is an upright row with a small bit of body English in it, you know. It's not a clean high pull or something, and you have to kind of break those two things up. Just because it looks similar to a power clean doesn't mean it's going to be the most effective power production exercise. But in this case, it's a really nice piece of accessory work and hypertrophy work where you're working very specific muscle groups that you're going to be using a lot in your sport.
Next up we've got is some beautifully well executed deadlifts.
So
that's
good.
Great to see. I've seen more of the people who are au fait with strength training and jiu-jitsu. You see a lot of them doing deadlifts, and they seem to be a big fan of those. For example, our coach will always talk about, he loves the deadlift because, say, if you're full guard or someone's getting you in a triangle, he likes to think about the exact same movement as a deadlift. He likes to stand up and keep that posture really strong. And again, there's no amount of upper back strength that is too much for jiu-jitsu. You'll never see someone come to jiu-jitsu and be like, Jesus, his back was too strong, and that's why he couldn't do that, or why that's why he lost, you know. So these are very well executed, great technique, posture is immaculate. a lot of leg drive from the floor, which is very interesting, which is you wouldn't think you'd see from a jiu-jitsu athlete doing deadlifts, but he has great deadlift technique here.
No, they're very, very good.
Posture is great. Upper back work. I mean, there's, this is very, very, very useful. Deadlifts are almost go without saying.
This is probably what you're looking for every non-strength sport athlete as well, and how their deadlift should look. They should have a very, very rigid and stiff start position, small bit of a dynamic start with just the hips dropping down into a start position and pulling. These are textbook. If you had 70 S&C students and you wanted to teach them how to tell everybody they're ever going to beat the deadlift, this is what the deadlift should look like.
Being in sick shape as well helps a lot.
Yeah.
But,
he's in crazy good condition, which you have to understand as well for a weight class sport like jiu-jitsu. If you're doing jiu-jitsu and you might never have intentions of competing, you're still training in a weight class sport, and you should want to be in the best condition possible, have the most amount of contractile tissue with the least amount of fat tissue, and just be in good condition. It'll help you with everything.
The last thing I want to talk about is his gymnastic ability. So this is something that's kind of interesting, and it's not something I would tell people looking to increase their outside jiu-jitsu training or combat sports training to go do, is go learn like press to handstand or planches or straddle to push up or whatever. He's doing a headstand to handstand push up here. I think this is more a remnant of the quality of the athlete rather than something he probably trained for. Now, obviously he trained for this, but I think it's because he is such a good quality athlete and his genetics are so good and his proprioceptive awareness and his upper body strength are so good that this probably came quite easy for him. Do I think it's benefiting his jiu-jitsu? Definitely. Do I think it's a feasible way of amateur jiu-jitsu people to go do? Not really. They're not that hard to learn, surprisingly enough. If you get someone who's like moderately talented at just in the terms of athletic ability and awareness of their body, a lot of people can learn handstands. A lot of people can get quite good at them if you're diligent with them. Do I think it would pay off for your jiu-jitsu? Not to a huge extent. I think if you did the other stuff before you got there, but I think it's just an interesting sight to see just kind of how athletic he is in general. Yeah,
it's more a symptom of his success than it is anything else,
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, if you're going to be able to do that stuff, it's a great sign already.
Yes.
You're probably not going to, you probably won't use it to say, like, A/B test and say, oh, can you do this? Okay, let's get you to be able to do this. And
you can't do a freestanding handstand push-up. You'll never be a blue belt.
You can't do plyometric handstand push-ups.
No.
Just some benching on a machine here then, perfectly applicable.
So again, like L-sit to handstand, just honestly in his case, I think it's a good example of how good an athlete you need to be for jiu-jitsu rather than training you need to do for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So if there's an athlete you'd like us to look at, if you can think there's enough training footage of their sport, whatever that may be, we'd love to have a look. Honestly, we'd love when people give suggestions to us. Fabricio was a very interesting case. Very jacked, very good jiu-jitsu. I like his jiu-jitsu style. I like that kind of constant pressure and fast moving. He's in great shape. He's great form and exercises. I'd love to see what the rest of his training looks like.
Absolutely. If you're a jiu-jitsu athlete or if you do any other combat sport, we do have a 10-week combat sports program. It's 4 gym sessions a week. You can run it 4 gym sessions a week over 10 weeks or 2 sessions a week over 20 weeks. It will make you faster, stronger, more powerful, and just a better person in general.
2 sessions.
2 sessions a week.